Every night, somewhere in your kitchen, there's a food sitting in your cupboard right now with a label that says, diabetic-friendly, no sugar added.
Or safe for blood sugar. And I want you to hear this clearly, with no hedging. For at least one of those foods, that label is wrong. Not exaggerated, not oversimplified. Wrong, in the way that matters, and what happens inside your bloodstream an hour after you eat it. I'm not talking about candy bars or soda. Everyone already knows those aren't diabetic-friendly. I'm talking about the foods sitting in the healthy aisle, the ones your own logic tells you are the safe choice. The fruit smoothie instead of the milkshake, the granola bar instead of the donut, the no sugar added cookies your grandchildren bought you for your birthday because the box reassured them it was fine. Foods that pass every test your eyes can run on a label, and fail the only test that actually counts, which happens in your blood, not on the shelf. And stay with me, because the fifth food on this list is the one that surprises almost everyone, including people who've been managing their blood sugar carefully for years, because it isn't hiding sugar at all. It's something your doctor may have specifically told you to eat more of. And the reason it belongs on this list has less to do with what's in it, and everything to do with how much of it we've quietly been told is a normal serving. By the time we get there, you'll understand why that one food is tied, directly, to the health of your kidneys, which is not a small thing to put at risk over a bowl of something you thought was helping you. My name is Dr. Park. I've spent more than 15 years practicing internal medicine with a research focus in nutritional biochemistry, which is really just the study of what food does to the body at the molecular level, once it's past your tongue and into your bloodstream, your liver, your kidneys, your brain. I did part of my training in Korea, where there's an old idea, yaksik dongwon, food and medicine share the same root. It's not a slogan, it's a genuinely useful lens, because it treats what you eat tonight as something with real, measurable consequences tomorrow, not just a pleasure or a punishment. I'm not here to sell you a supplement or scare you into a 12-week program. I'm here to walk you through what the actual research says, in plain language, so that the next time you're standing in a grocery aisle holding a box that says, diabetic-friendly, you know what question to ask it. When you eat something with carbohydrate in it, bread, fruit, rice, oats, anything, your digestive system breaks it down into glucose, which is just a simple sugar, and that glucose enters your bloodstream. Your pancreas, a small gland tucked behind your stomach, about the size of your hand, responds by releasing insulin, a hormone whose job is to usher that glucose out of your blood and into your cells, where it's used for energy. In a body without diabetes, this happens smoothly, almost silently. In a body with type 2 diabetes, and this affects roughly 1 in 10 adults in the United States, and closer to 1 in 4 adults over 65, according to the CDC's own national diabetes statistics. The cells have become resistant to insulin's signal, so glucose lingers in the blood longer, at higher concentrations than it should. Here's the part almost nobody explains clearly. It's not just the total sugar in a food that matters. It's how fast that sugar hits your bloodstream, and how high it spikes, and how often that spike happens over the course of a day, a month, a year. A food can have very little added sugar, and still spike your blood glucose hard and fast. A food can say no sugar added, in bold letters on the front, and still behave, inside your body, almost exactly like a spoonful of table sugar. This is the gap between the label and the lab, and it's the gap where every food on today's list is hiding. I want you to hold on to one idea as we go through this countdown, because every single item traces back to it. Most advice about diabetic eating focuses on one word: sugar. Is it on the ingredient list? How many grams? But your blood doesn't read ingredient lists. Your blood responds to glycemic load, how quickly and how high a food raises your blood glucose based on the type of carbohydrate, how processed it is, how much fiber and fat and protein are traveling alongside it, and critically, how much of it you actually eat in one sitting. A food engineered to look safe on the label can still carry a glycemic load that spikes you exactly the way sugar does. Keep that phrase in your mind. Glycemic load, not just sugar content, because I'm going to come back to it again and again. At number 5 on tonight's list, and I'm climbing toward the one I promised you, so stay with me, is the bottled or fresh squeezed fruit juice, and its modern cousin, the healthy fruit smoothie. Here's why this earns a spot on a list about diabetes. Fruit itself, eaten whole, is genuinely a reasonable choice for most people managing blood sugar. An apple, an orange, a handful of berries. These come packaged with fiber, which slows the absorption of their natural sugar, so your blood glucose rises gently rather than sharply. But the moment you juice that fruit, or blend it into a smoothie and strip out most of the fiber, you've removed the one thing that was protecting you. What's left is largely fructose and glucose in liquid form, absorbed almost as fast as a soft drink. A single 12-ounce glass of orange juice can carry close to 36 grams of sugar. Not added sugar, just the fruit's own sugar, concentrated, which is very close to what you'd get from a can of cola. Your body cannot tell the difference between natural sugar and added sugar once it's in your bloodstream. Glucose is glucose. And there's a second layer here that most people never hear about, which is what this does to your liver. Fructose, unlike glucose, is processed almost entirely by the liver. In small amounts from whole fruit, that's a manageable job. But when you deliver a concentrated dose of fructose in liquid form repeatedly, day after day, You're asking your liver to convert a portion of that sugar into fat. And over time, that's one of the documented drivers of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, a condition the American Liver Foundation and multiple clinical studies have linked closely to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. It's a feedback loop. The liver gets fattier, insulin resistance worsens, blood sugar control gets harder, and the healthy juice habit that felt virtuous is quietly working against you from two directions at once. So what should you do instead? If you love the taste of fruit, eat the fruit, whole, with its fiber intact, and treat juice the way you treat a dessert, something occasional rather than daily. If you want a smoothie, keep the whole fruit. Add a source of protein like plain Greek yogurt, and keep the portion to what fits in a coffee mug, not a pint glass. That single change, fiber back in, portion down, moves a food from spiking your blood sugar to gently supporting it. Number 4 is dried fruit, and specifically the versions marketed in diabetic-friendly trail mixes and snack bags, the ones that lean on the word natural, the way other products lean on, no sugar added. The reason this one catches people off guard is that dried fruit still contains its fiber, which makes people assume it behaves like whole fruit. It doesn't, for one simple reason. Drying removes water, and removing water concentrates everything else, including sugar, into a much smaller volume. A cup of fresh grapes has roughly 15 grams of natural sugar. A cup of raisins, the same grapes, dried, has closer to 100 grams. Because you're no longer eating a cup of grapes, you're eating the sugar equivalent of about 4 cups of them, packed into a handful. It's very easy to eat a handful of raisins or dried mango in under a minute. It is much harder to eat 4 cups of fresh grapes in under a minute. The fiber slows absorption somewhat, yes, but it cannot compensate for a 4-fold to 6-fold concentration of sugar delivered in a portion size your hand doesn't register as unusual. So what should you do? If you enjoy dried fruit, treat a small handful, realistically about a tablespoon, mixed into a much larger portion of unsalted nuts or seeds, as the ceiling, not the starting point, and read it the way you'd read a candy label. Because metabolically, that's closer to what it is. Fresh or frozen fruit, in season, remains the better everyday choice. And this is genuinely one place where a Korean seasonal eating habit fits naturally. Choosing what's actually in season, when sugar content and price both tend to be more favorable, rather than relying on dried, shelf-stable fruit year-round out of convenience. Now, before I give you numbers 3 and 2, and I want you to really hear this, because these are the two that surprise even people who've been reading labels carefully for years. If this kind of research matters to you, subscribing means you won't miss the next one, where I go through the everyday drinks quietly raising blood pressure after 50. Let's keep going. Number 3 is the flavored, instant oatmeal packet. The individual paper sachets you tear open and add hot water to, often marketed with hearts and blood sugar-friendly language directly on the box. Here's why this deserves scrutiny. Plain oats are, genuinely, one of the better grain choices for blood sugar, largely because of a soluble fiber called beta-glucan, which forms a gel in your gut that slows glucose absorption. This is well established in nutrition research and even referenced in some FDA-approved heart health claims for whole oats. But the instant flavored packets are a different food entirely. To make oats cook in 90 seconds and taste appealing without any of you adding your own toppings, manufacturers typically process the oats far more finely, which speeds digestion and blunts the beta-glucan effect, and then add sugar directly into the packet, often between 8 and 12 grams per serving, sometimes more in the maple brown sugar or cinnamon varieties, precisely the sugar the plain version wouldn't need. There's a second, quieter cost here too, and it belongs to your gut. The fiber that survives the instant processing is a fraction of what's in old-fashioned or steel-cut oats, and fiber isn't only about blood sugar, it's the primary fuel for the beneficial bacteria living in your colon, the ones increasingly linked, in ongoing research, to lower systemic inflammation and better metabolic health as we age. Trade whole oats for the instant, sweetened kind, often enough. And you're not just adding sugar, you're quietly starving part of your gut microbiome of the fiber it depends on. So what should you do? Buy plain rolled or steel-cut oats, no flavor packet at all, and add your own toppings. A small spoon of unsweetened peanut butter, fresh berries, a dash of cinnamon, which some smaller studies suggest may modestly help insulin sensitivity, though the evidence there is still preliminary rather than settled. You control the sugar entirely, and you get the fiber the food was supposed to deliver in the first place. Number 2 is the broad category of low-fat or no-sugar-added packaged foods. The fat-free yogurt, the low-fat granola, the reduced-fat peanut butter. And this is the one I find genuinely frustrating, because it's a direct legacy of decades of well-intentioned but flawed advice. Here's the mechanism, and I want to be precise about it, because this is a real, well-documented pattern in food manufacturing, not a conspiracy theory. Fat carries flavor and texture. When a manufacturer strips fat out of a product to sell it as low-fat, the result usually tastes thin, watery, or bland. So something has to be added back to make it palatable. And very often, that something is a starch or sugar-based thickener. One of the most common is maltodextrin, a highly processed carbohydrate derived from corn, rice, or potato starch. Here's the detail that surprises almost everyone. Maltodextrin has a glycemic index around 85 to 105, depending on the source. which means, in some cases, it raises blood sugar just as fast or faster than table sugar itself, which sits around 65. It's not sweet to the tongue, so it doesn't trigger the same alarm as sugar does. But your bloodstream reacts to it the same way, or worse. A no-sugar-added cookie can genuinely contain 0 grams of table sugar and still spike your blood glucose sharply. Because the sugar has been replaced by a starch, your body converts into glucose almost as quickly. This is precisely why our mental model from earlier matters so much. The label tells you about sugar. It says nothing about glycemic load. So what should you do? Stop scanning for the word sugar alone and start looking one line down at total carbohydrates and fiber together, and at the ingredient list for words like maltodextrin, dextrose, or rice syrup solids near the top. In practice, this usually means choosing the full-fat version of yogurt or peanut butter in a smaller portion, rather than the low-fat version in a larger one. Full-fat, plain Greek yogurt with real berries you add yourself, rather than a no-sugar-added flavored cup engineered around a starch thickener. Fat, eaten in reasonable amounts, isn't the enemy that decades of packaging trained us to believe it was. And for blood sugar specifically, it often slows digestion in a way that helps you, not hurts you. Now we're at the one I promised you at the very beginning, and I want to say, before I name it, that this is not a food I'm telling you to fear. It's a food I'm asking you to measure, because the difference between those two things, for this particular item, is the difference between protecting your kidneys and quietly wearing them down over the years. Number 1 is whole grain bread, and its close relative, the modern diabetic-friendly or gluten-free bread aisle. Specifically, the portion we've all been taught to consider normal. Whole grain bread is not a trick food. It genuinely contains more fiber and nutrients than white bread. And if your doctor has told you to choose whole grains over refined ones, that advice remains sound. Please don't hear what I'm about to say as a reason to abandon it. The problem isn't the bread's identity. It's the serving size and how consistently we underestimate it. Here's a piece of research I think about often. A large meta-analysis published in the BMJ in 2012, pooling data from several long-term cohort studies, including some of the largest population studies on rice consumption ever conducted, several based in Asian populations with very high average rice intake, found that higher consumption of white rice was associated with a meaningfully increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes, and the association grew stronger as intake increased. I want to be precise about what that means. This is an association from population studies, not a controlled experiment proving direct causation in every individual, and rice itself isn't uniquely dangerous. The researchers pointed specifically to the glycemic load of the large portions typically consumed, portions that, in some of the study populations, were considerably larger than what most Western nutrition guidelines consider a single serving. The lesson generalizes directly to bread. 2 slices of whole grain bread, which many people eat without a second thought at breakfast, can carry a glycemic load similar to a modest bowl of white rice or a scoop of white pasta, and the whole grain label on the bag doesn't shrink that load. It only slightly softens it. Now here's why I'm tying this specifically to your kidneys, and I need you to really hear this part. When blood glucose runs high, not once, but repeatedly, meal after meal, year after year, it does damage to the small blood vessels throughout your body, and your kidneys are one of the most vulnerable places this happens. The kidneys filter roughly 50 gallons of blood a day through microscopic vessels and filtering units called nephrons, and chronically elevated glucose gradually damages those tiny vessels, thickening and scarring the filtering membranes. The National Kidney Foundation and the NIH's National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases both identified diabetes as the leading cause of kidney failure in the United States, responsible for roughly 44% of new cases, according to NIDDK's own data. This isn't a rare, distant complication. It is the single most common reason adults end up on dialysis, and it doesn't announce itself with pain or obvious symptoms until a significant amount of kidney function is already gone, which is precisely why the everyday, seemingly small decision about how much bread is one serving matters so much more than it feels like it should. So what should you do? And this is genuinely practical, not restrictive. Keep the whole grain bread if you enjoy it, but measure a real serving once, with an actual scale or measuring cup, so your eyes recalibrate to what 1 slice or a half cup of cooked grain truly looks like on your own plate. Because most of us are working from a mental picture that's been quietly inflating for 20 years. Pair that carbohydrate with protein and a non-starchy vegetable at the same meal, which measurably slows the glucose spike. And ask your physician, at your next visit, for a simple blood test called urine albumin to creatinine ratio, alongside your regular A1C. It's one of the earliest markers of kidney stress, often detectable years before symptoms appear, and it's inexpensive and widely available. Catching that early is the entire difference between a course correction and a crisis. It's not what's missing from the label, it's what happens in your blood an hour later. I want you to carry that sentence with you the next time you're standing in a grocery aisle, because every single food we've walked through tonight passed the label test and failed that one. So how do you actually use all of this, starting tonight, without turning every meal into a research project? Here is the practical version, and I'd like you to think of it less as 5 rules and more as 1 habit repeated at every meal. Before you eat, glance for 3 things: the fiber content relative to the total carbohydrate, the realistic portion size compared to what's actually on your plate, and whether the healthy claim on the front of the package is describing sugar specifically, or the fuller picture of glycemic load. If a food is high in carbohydrate and low in fiber, pair it with protein or a non-starchy vegetable in the same sitting, because that combination genuinely slows and blunts the glucose spike. This is one of the more consistently replicated findings in nutrition research, not a folk remedy. And where it fits your own preferences, there is real, published research, smaller clinical trials, published in journals including Diabetes Care, suggesting that a tablespoon or two of vinegar, taken shortly before a carbohydrate-heavy meal, modestly blunts the after-meal glucose spike, likely through slowing stomach emptying and interfering with certain starch-digesting enzymes. This happens to align naturally with a very old Korean habit, the small vinegar-dressed side dish, muchim, served alongside rice at nearly every meal, not because anything Korean is inherently healthier, but because that particular pairing happens to have real, testable biochemistry behind it. I want to be honest with you. Fermented Korean side dishes are not a blanket solution either. Many traditional banchan are quite high in sodium, which matters enormously for blood pressure, and again, for kidney health. So this is a case where the tradition helps in one specific way, through the vinegar and the pairing habit, while carrying its own separate risk in another, through the salt. Food as medicine cuts both ways, and I'd rather tell you that plainly than let the frame do work it hasn't earned. Let me tell you about a patient I'll call Grace, because her story is the reason I wanted to make this particular video. Grace was 68, recently retired, living alone since her husband had passed a few years earlier, and genuinely trying. She'd cleaned out her pantry after her diagnosis, replaced her usual bread and cereal with everything the grocery store labeled diabetic-friendly, and was doing her morning walks faithfully. Her A1C, the 3-month average blood sugar measurement, wasn't moving the way either of us expected given how hard she was working at it. When we went through her actual daily intake together, not what she remembered, but what she'd genuinely eaten, meal by meal, the picture became clear. Her breakfast was a healthy fruit smoothie. Her snack was a handful of dried fruit and nut mix from a bag that said diabetic-friendly trail mix on the front. Her go-to convenience meal, on tired evenings, was a no-sugar-added frozen dinner with a low-fat sauce. Every single choice had been made in good faith, following labels that told her exactly what she wanted to hear. None of them were doing what she believed they were doing. We didn't overhaul her life. We changed 3 things. Whole fruit instead of the smoothie, a much smaller handful of the dried fruit mix eaten alongside plain unsalted almonds instead of alone, and reading past the front of the frozen dinner box to the ingredient list on the back. 4 months later, her A1C had genuinely improved, and what she told me stayed with me. She said it felt like something she was finally adding to her own understanding, not another list of things being taken away from her. That shift from restriction to genuine knowledge is the whole reason I make these videos. Before we close, I want to be honest about where this general guidance does and doesn't apply, because a video like this one is built for a broad audience, and you are one specific person with your own history. If you're on insulin or a sulfonylurea medication, changing your carbohydrate pattern, even in a genuinely healthy direction, can shift your risk of hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. So please make that kind of change alongside your physician or a certified diabetes educator, not on your own timeline. If you're already living with diagnosed kidney disease, your safe intake of potassium, phosphorus, and even certain fruits looks different from the general guidance I've given tonight, and your nephrologist's specific numbers should always override anything you hear in a video like this one. And if you take a blood thinner, such as warfarin, a sudden increase or decrease in vitamin K-rich vegetables can meaningfully affect how that medication works, which is a separate conversation worth having with your own doctor, rather than adjusting quietly on your own. I want to say clearly, because I mean it, nothing in this video is a reason to stop a medication your doctor has prescribed, skip a screening you're due for, or delay a visit you've been putting off. Everything here is meant to sit alongside good medical care, not replace it. This is educational information based on published, peer-reviewed research. It isn't personalized medical advice, and it can't account for your specific labs, your specific medications, or your specific history. Please talk with your own physician or a registered dietitian before making real changes to your diet, especially if you're managing an existing condition, living with kidney disease, or on dialysis. Let's bring it all together, quickly, because I know your time is valuable. Fruit juice and smoothies strip away the fiber that was protecting you, and burden your liver with concentrated fructose. Eat the whole fruit instead. Dried fruit concentrates sugar into a portion your hand doesn't recognize as unusual. Measure it, and pair it with unsweetened nuts. Instant flavored oatmeal trades real fiber for hidden added sugar. Buy plain oats and top them yourself. Low-fat and no-sugar-added packaged foods often replace sugar with fast-acting starches like maltodextrin that spike your blood glucose just as hard. Read past the front of the box to the ingredient list. And whole-grain bread, genuinely a reasonable choice in a real serving, becomes a quiet, long-term risk to your kidneys the moment one serving has crept up to double what it should be. Measure it once so your eyes can recalibrate. If you only start with 2 things tonight, make it these. Measure your bread or rice portion honestly, just once, and ask your doctor about that urine albumin test at your next appointment. Those two moves alone will tell you more about where you actually stand than any label ever could. It's not what's missing from the label, it's what happens in your blood an hour later. That's the whole idea behind everything I do on this channel. Real, sourced information about what's actually happening inside your body as you get older. Not fear, and not a sales pitch. I'd genuinely like to know which of these 5 surprised you the most. Tell me in the comments, because I read every one of them, and it shapes what I cover next. And if one of these foods is sitting in someone else's kitchen right now, a parent, a neighbor, someone living alone who reaches for the diabetic-friendly bag because the label did the thinking for them, it takes 10 seconds to send them this video. If you want more of this kind of research, explained the way your appointment never has time for, subscribe to Food Truth MD. Next week, we're looking at the 5 everyday drinks quietly raising blood pressure after 50, and at least one of them is sitting in your refrigerator right now, marketed as the heart-healthy choice. I'll see you then.